The colonel circled her like a predator, eyes fixed on the small badge partially visible beneath her name tag. "Playing dress-up soldier?" he mocked, voice carrying across the formation. 70 recruits watched in uncomfortable silence as he reached for the paper, clearly intending to rip it off and humiliate her further. His fingers caught the edge, tearing away the covering to reveal gleaming silver beneath. Suddenly, his face drained of color. The Silver Star, one of America's highest decorations for valor in combat, shone in the morning sun. Everyone froze, including the colonel. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories of quiet courage and dignity in the face of misjudgment resonate with you, consider subscribing for more tales of remarkable individuals who lead by example. The Georgia sun beat down mercilessly on Fort Benning's parade ground, transforming the open expanse of asphalt into a heat-radiating surface that could be felt through the soles of standard-issue boots. 75 officer candidate school recruits stood in perfectly aligned rows, bodies rigid at attention despite the rivulets of sweat tracing paths down temples and backs. The morning inspection was only 15 minutes in, but already dark patches spread across light tan uniforms. Recruit Naomi Reeves occupied a position in the third row, fifth from the left, her posture a study in military precision. At 31, she was older than most of her fellow candidates, a fact that had earned her occasional sidelong glances during the 3 weeks since their training began. Unlike the others whose faces betrayed the strain of maintaining perfect stillness under the punishing heat, Naomi's expression remained impassive, her dark eyes focused forward with a calm intensity that suggested familiarity with far worse conditions than a sweltering Georgia morning. The click of polished shoes against asphalt grew steadily louder as Colonel Atticus Hargrove made his methodical way down the row in front of her. A tall man, with iron-gray hair cropped so close to his skull it appeared painted on, Hargrove had made his reputation breaking recruits down to their foundations before rebuilding them in the image of what he considered proper officer material. 29 years of military service had honed him into a weapon of psychological precision, capable of identifying weaknesses with the accuracy of a surgeon and exploiting them with the mercy of a guillotine. 3 paces behind, the colonel followed Drill Sergeant Britta Landry, her clipboard held at the perfect angle as she documented each of Hargrove's observations with swift efficiency. Unlike her commanding officer, whose inspection style resembled a performance designed to unsettle, Landry watched the recruits with analytical detachment, her keen eyes occasionally narrowing when she noticed something that piqued her professional interest. "Candidate Mitchell, explain to me why your belt buckle resembles a carnival mirror rather than military hardware," Hargrove barked at a recruit in the row ahead of Naomi. The young man, barely 23 by the look of him, stiffened further, eyes locked forward. "No excuse, sir," he replied, the traditional response to any identified deficiency. "No excuse indeed," Hargrove agreed, his voice pitched to carry across the formation. "Perhaps you were too busy contemplating your future leadership potential to actually polish your brass this morning? Drop and give me 20 perfect push-ups. Now." The recruit immediately fell out of formation and began his punishment, the colonel's attention already shifting to his next target. This was the theater of training, public corrections serving as examples to the entire company, moments of individual humiliation designed to forge collective discipline. Naomi remained perfectly still as Hargrove's inspection drew closer to her position, her breathing controlled and measured despite the heat. Her uniform was immaculate, every crease where it should be, boots polished to a mirror shine that had required 30 minutes of patient work before dawn. Nothing in her appearance invited criticism except for one small detail, partially visible beneath the edge of her regulation. Name tag was what appeared to be a small, unofficial addition, something paper-thin, its edge just barely protruding. As Colonel Hargrove reached her position, his eyes performed their usual methodical scan from head to toe, practiced in the art of finding flaws where others saw perfection. His gaze halted at her chest, focusing on the almost imperceptible irregularity beneath her name tag. "What exactly is this, recruit?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous quietness that those familiar with his methods recognized as far more threatening than his shouted commands. Naomi's gaze remained fixed forward, her position unwavering. "No excuse, sir." The colonel's eyes narrowed, his head tilting slightly as he studied the offending item more closely. Are you wearing some kind of unauthorized decoration, Recruit Reeves? Some sort of paper badge? No excuse, sir, she repeated, the only permitted response, though something flickered briefly in her eyes. Not fear, but something more complex. Colonel Hargrove's face darkened, a flush of anger rising beneath his tanned skin. Are we playing dress-up soldier now, Reeves? Is this training a joke to you? Naomi remained at perfect attention, not a muscle twitching in her face despite the mounting humiliation, as the entire formation became aware of the colonel's focus on her. Behind Hargrove, Drill Sergeant Landry's expression shifted subtly, her eyes studying Reeves with puzzled intensity rather than the usual clinical observation. In the row behind Naomi, Recruit Zephyr Tate shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting nervously between the colonel and Reeves. At 24, fresh from his civilian engineering degree, Tate had already learned to fear Hargrove's unpredictable temper. Having been on the receiving end of his cutting remarks during their first week, the tension radiating from the confrontation was palpable, heavy as the humid air around them. "Colonel," Landry began quietly, but Hargrove silenced her with a sharp gesture. "Recruit Reeves here thinks military decorations are arts and crafts projects," the colonel announced, his voice now projected for the entire company to hear. "Perhaps we should all make paper badges to wear. Would that improve morale, candidates?" A scatter of nervous laughter rippled through the formation, recruits eager to align themselves with the colonel's mockery rather than risk becoming its next target. The sound hung in the air briefly before dissolving into uncomfortable silence as Hargrove continued to glare at Naomi, whose expression remained unchanged despite the public ridicule. Behind that mask of military discipline, Naomi's mind flashed briefly to that morning, her hands carefully placing the paper over the metallic object before reporting for formation, a deliberate choice she had made every day since arriving at Fort Benning, a necessary concealment for reasons beyond what anyone here could understand. Every badge, every insignia, every element of the uniform you wear represents something earned, Hargrove continued, his voice taking on the practiced cadence of a prepared speech. Those who have truly served understand that these symbols carry the weight of sacrifice, of blood and sweat and tears. They are not fashion accessories or participation trophies. Naomi stood unwavering, accepting the verbal onslaught with a stoicism that, had the colonel been more observant, might have seemed incongruous for a standard recruit facing such intense scrutiny. Most candidates would have shown signs of breaking by now, trembling hands, wavering gaze, sweat not just from heat, but from anxiety. "I expect to see that unauthorized item removed immediately following this formation," Hargrove concluded, his voice clipped with finality. "And you will report to my office at 1300 hours to explain your flagrant disregard for uniform regulations." "Yes, sir," Naomi responded, her voice clear and controlled. The colonel studied her for a moment longer, perhaps expecting, even hoping for, some sign of intimidation that never materialized. With a barely perceptible shake of his head, he moved on to the next recruit, though the encounter had disrupted his rhythm, thrown him slightly off balance in a way he couldn't quite identify. As the inspection continued down the line, Drill Sergeant Landry lingered a moment longer, her eyes still fixed on Naomi with a peculiar expression. Not quite recognition, but something approaching it as though trying to place a face encountered long ago in entirely different circumstances. 2 days later, the company found themselves spread across the notorious Courage Course, Fort Benning's most physically demanding obstacle complex. Designed to push candidates beyond their perceived limitations, the course featured 22 obstacles spread over 3 miles of rugged terrain, each designed to test different aspects of physical ability and mental fortitude under pressure. Drill Sergeant Elric Forrest stood at the base of the rope climb, stopwatch in hand, his weathered face set in perpetual disappointment. A former infantry squad leader with combat experience in 3 theaters, Forrest approached his role as trainer with the grim determination of someone who understood that his evaluations could literally determine life and death for future soldiers under these candidates' command. "Move it, Harrison! My grandmother could scale that rope faster, and she's been dead for 12 years, he bellowed, as a male recruit struggled halfway up the 30-foot climb. 3 seconds faster than yesterday. Keep improving, and you might actually pass this course before retirement age." Despite the harsh words, there was an undercurrent of encouragement in Forrest's criticism of the male recruits, a grudging acknowledgement of effort, small improvements noted and validated even within the verbal barrage. This encouragement was noticeably absent when female candidates approached his station. Winters, that pathetic attempt wouldn't meet standards for elementary school gym class, let alone officer candidate school, he snapped, as recruit Persephone Winters completed the climb 5 seconds slower than the male candidate before her, though still within qualifying time. Try again, and this time pretend like you actually want to be here. Naomi Reeves approached the obstacle next, her breathing controlled despite having just completed the grueling low crawl through mud and under barbed wire. Where other candidates showed exhaustion, hands on knees, gulping air, Naomi had transitioned between obstacles with mechanical efficiency, her pace steady and sustainable. Forrest's eyes narrowed as she took position at the base of the rope. "Clock's ticking, Reeves. Let's see if you can manage what actual soldiers do every day." Without responding, Naomi grasped the rope and began her ascent. Her technique was flawless, using primarily leg strength to drive upward while her arms served mainly to stabilize. Conserving energy through perfect form rather than raw power, she moved up the rope with smooth precision that spoke of extensive prior training, reaching the top in a time that matched the fastest male recruit of the day. Forrest stared at his stopwatch, momentarily thrown by a performance that contradicted his expectations. Recovering quickly, he barked, "Acceptable, Reeves, but this is just one obstacle. Don't get cocky." As Naomi descended and prepared to move to the next station, a commotion erupted behind her. Recruit Zephyr Tate had attempted the climb, but slipped halfway up, twisting his ankle as he fell back to the ground. He lay grimacing, in pain, clearly unable to continue without assistance. Forrest made no immediate move to help, his expression suggesting this was a valuable lesson in failure rather than a medical situation requiring attention. "On the battlefield, Tate, there's no time out for twisted ankles. Either overcome it or become a casualty your team has to manage." Without hesitation, Naomi doubled back, kneeling beside the injured recruit. "Let me see," she said quietly, her hands already moving to assess the injury with practiced efficiency. "What exactly do you think you're doing, Reeves?" Forrest demanded, striding toward them. "Did I order you to play medic? Are you in command of this training exercise now?" Naomi looked up calmly. "He needs medical evaluation, Sergeant. Possible grade 2 lateral ankle sprain." The precision of her assessment, using proper medical terminology rather than layman's terms, caused Forrest's eyes to narrow further. "And where exactly did you receive your medical training, recruit?" "First aid is basic knowledge, Sergeant," she replied, deflecting smoothly while helping Tate to his feet, allowing him to use her shoulder for support. "Did I order you to break formation and assist this recruit?" Forrest pressed, his voice rising. "When I want your help, I'll request it directly. Until then, you follow the course as directed." "With respect, Sergeant, leave no one behind is a core value taught from day one," Naomi responded, her tone remaining professional despite the challenge implicit in her words. Tate, balanced awkwardly on one foot with his arm around Naomi's shoulders, attempted to defuse the situation. "She was helping me, Sergeant." Forrest's attention snapped to the male recruit. "When I want your opinion, I'll issue it to you," he snapped before refocusing on Naomi. 20 extra laps around the course perimeter when everyone else finishes. Since you have so much energy to spare playing hero, you can put it to productive use." "Yes, Sergeant," Naomi replied without inflection, neither argumentative nor cowed. She helped Tate to the medical station at the course edge before returning to complete the remaining obstacles at the same measured pace she had maintained throughout, showing no concern for the punishment awaiting her. From the observation point overlooking the training area, Colonel Hargrove stood with Major Quintessa Blackwood, the officer selection board representative assigned to evaluate this particular cohort of candidates. Blackwood's clipboard contained detailed notes on each recruit's performance, patterns emerging across the 3 weeks of training they had observed so far. "Reeves," Blackwood noted, watching as Naomi completed the final obstacle with the same efficiency she had shown throughout. "Her physical performance is consistently superior, but there's something unusual in her approach. Most candidates show progressive improvement as they adapt to the training. She arrived already. Adapted." Hargrove's expression soured slightly at the mention of Reeves. The uniform violation from yesterday's inspection suggests a candidate who believes the rules don't fully apply to her. That kind of attitude gets people killed in combat situations. Perhaps, Blackwood replied neutrally, though her assistance to the injured recruit aligns perfectly with leadership values we aim to instill. Combat experience, maybe? Just another washout waiting to happen, Hargrove dismissed with a wave of his hand. Running on ego and something to prove. We see it every cycle. Candidates who believe their civilian accomplishments translate directly to military capability. They're usually the first to break when real pressure is applied. Below them, as the other exhausted recruits were dismissed to clean up before their next training evolution, Naomi began her punishment laps with the same measured pace she had maintained throughout the course. Where others would have shown resentment or fatigue, her expression remained focused, her running form textbook perfect, as though the extra 20 laps were simply part of a predetermined training plan rather than punishment. Interesting, Blackwood murmured, making another note on her clipboard. Very interesting indeed. The barracks fell quiet as evening approached, the exhaustion of the day's training evident in the subdued movements of recruits preparing for the next morning. Most had collapsed onto their bunks, muscles aching from the courage course, but a small group gathered near the center of the room, where recruit Zephyr Tate sat with his ankle elevated on a folded blanket. An ice pack fashioned from a plastic bag and crushed ice from the mess hall balanced precariously on the swelling. Medics said it's just a sprain, Tate explained to the concerned faces around him. No training exemption, but modified PT for 3 days. He glanced toward Naomi's bunk, where she sat methodically polishing her boots, seemingly unaffected by the additional 20 laps she'd completed after everyone else had been dismissed. I didn't get a chance to thank you properly, Reeves, for helping me out there. Naomi looked up briefly, acknowledging him with a slight nod before returning to her task. Her movements were precise and economical, the same careful attention evident in this mundane task as in her performance on the obstacle course. Unlike the other recruits whose personal areas showed varying degrees of disarray, after weeks of grueling training, Naomi's space remained immaculate, bed made to exact specifications, gear arranged in perfect order, everything positioned according to regulations that many candidates struggle to maintain. Persephone Winters, a former collegiate athlete whose competitive nature had initially marked her as a standout in the company, dropped onto the bunk beside Tate. Reeves never talks about herself, she observed, not bothering to lower her voice, though Naomi sat less than 15 feet away. 3 weeks in, and nobody knows anything about her. Where she's from, what she did before this, why she joined, nothing. Some people prefer privacy, Tate replied, shifting the ice pack to better cover the swollen area. In the military, Persephone scoffed, there's no such thing. We live on top of each other, change clothes together, eat together. Privacy is an illusion. That doesn't mean everyone needs to share their life story, Tate countered, though curiosity tinged his voice as he glanced again toward Naomi. Persephone stood and approached Naomi's bunk, seemingly determined to satisfy her curiosity. Your hands, she said without preamble, gesturing toward Naomi's fingers as they worked the cloth over the boot leather in circular motions. Those calluses aren't from 3 weeks of OCS. Naomi paused, looking up with a neutral expression that revealed nothing. I worked construction before applying to the program, she replied smoothly, the explanation reasonable, though offered without elaboration. And where'd you learn to field strip an M4 that fast during weapons training yesterday? Persephone pressed. You did it without even looking at your hands. The rest of us were following the manuals step by step, while you had yours reassembled in under 30 seconds. Had a friend who taught me the basics, Naomi said, returning to her boot polishing. Seemed useful to practice before coming here. Persephone opened her mouth to continue her interrogation, but the barracks door swung open with a bang that immediately brought every recruit to their feet at attention. The sudden appearance of Colonel Hargrove himself sent a ripple of tension through the room. Barracks inspections were typically conducted by drill sergeants, not the commanding officer of the OCS program. As you were, Hargrove announced, though no one relaxed. Behind him stood Drill Sergeant Landry, clipboard in hand as always, her expression unreadable. Surprise inspection. Sometimes in the field, you don't get a 5-minute warning before your position is evaluated. The colonel moved through the barracks with deliberate slowness, his gaze sweeping over each recruit's area with the precision of a laser scanner. Unlike the theatrical criticism of the morning formation, his inspection now was methodical and silent, creating a different kind of psychological pressure, the weight of anticipation, of waiting for the hammer to fall. When he reached Naomi's area, he paused longer than he had at any other station. His eyes traveled over her perfectly made bed, the precisely aligned boots beneath it, the equipment arranged in textbook order. Finding no obvious deficiencies in her area, his attention shifted to her footlocker. "Open it," he ordered, the first words he had spoken since beginning the inspection. Naomi complied immediately, kneeling to unlock and lift the lid in one fluid motion. Inside, her equipment and personal items were organized with the same methodical precision as everything else in her space. Folded clothing, aligned with military corners, toiletries arranged by size, even her spare bootlaces coiled in perfect circles. Hargrove's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, the lack of obvious deficiencies clearly irritating him rather than impressing him. He began methodically removing items from the footlocker, inspecting each before setting it aside with less care than Naomi had clearly taken in arranging them. "What's this?" he asked suddenly, extracting a folded piece of paper that had been tucked beneath her spare uniform items. The edge of official letterhead was visible, along with the partial word commendation, before Naomi subtly shifted her position, blocking the view of other curious recruits who were watching the inspection with a mixture of relief that it wasn't their turn and tension at the colonel's unusual focus on Reeves. "Personal correspondence, sir," Naomi replied, her voice neutral despite the first flash of genuine emotion crossing her features. A momentary tightening around her eyes, suggesting concern, as Hargrove unfolded the letter and began to read. "Unauthorized communication," Hargrove declared, refolding the paper and pocketing it. "All correspondence is to be logged and subject to inspection, as clearly outlined in your orientation materials." His eyes held Naomi's, challenging her to object. "Yes, sir," she acknowledged, her momentary display of emotion once again concealed behind professional stoicism. Having found at least one violation, Hargrove appeared satisfied enough to continue the inspection, though Drill Sergeant Landry lingered a moment longer, her gaze moving between Naomi and the colonel with an expression suggesting she found something amiss in the interaction beyond the simple disciplinary issue. As Hargrove completed his rounds and prepared to leave, he paused at the barracks entrance. "Discipline isn't selective, candidates," he announced to the room. "You don't get to choose which regulations matter and which you can ignore. In combat, that kind of selective adherence gets people killed." With deliberate casualness, he withdrew the confiscated letter from his pocket, crumpled it into a ball, and dropped it into the trash can beside the door before exiting. The barracks remained silent for several long moments after the door closed, the tension gradually dissipating as recruits realized the inspection had concluded. Persephone returned to her bunk, her earlier curiosity about Naomi now mixed with a hint of sympathy. "That was personal," she murmured to Tate, "even for Hargrove." Tate nodded, his eyes on Naomi, who had returned to organizing her disrupted footlocker with the same careful precision, her expression betraying nothing of her thoughts. Hours later, after lights out had plunged the barracks into darkness, punctuated only by the soft sounds of exhausted recruits sleeping, a shadow moved silently between the bunks. Naomi, moving with practiced stealth that would have been impossible for someone whose first experience with military discipline was merely 3 weeks old, made her way to the trash can near the door. Extracting the crumpled letter, she returned to her bunk and, using the faint light from the emergency exit sign, carefully smoothed out the paper. Her eyes moved over the military letterhead, the official seal, and the partially visible text referring to Operation Kingfisher and exceptional service under extreme conditions. The signature at the bottom, while smudged from Hargrove's rough handling, remained legible enough to recognize the rank of the signatory, a major general whose name was well known in certain specialized branches of service. Naomi folded the letter carefully along its original creases before tucking it into a waterproof pouch hidden within the lining of her toiletry kit. Her expression, momentarily unguarded in the privacy of darkness, revealed a complex mix of emotions. Determination tinged with the weariness of someone engaged in a protracted battle few around her could comprehend. The following week brought classroom instruction on tactical decision-making, a brief respite from the physical demands of field training, though no less mentally taxing. The company sat in tiered seating, while Captain Devlin Rhodes, an infantry officer with recent deployment experience, walked them through case studies of small unit actions from recent conflicts. Terrain dictates tactics, Rhodes explained, pointing to a topographical map projected on the screen. In this particular engagement along the ridgeline near Kandahar province, the unit faced communications challenges due to the mountainous features blocking line-of-sight transmission. This forced a modification of standard operating procedures and contributed to the confusion during the initial contact. From her seat in the middle row, Naomi studied the map with a focused intensity different from her fellow candidates. While others furiously took notes, trying to absorb information they had never been exposed to before, her eyes moved over the terrain features with the recognition of someone seeing familiar territory rather than an academic exercise. "Actually, sir," she said during a pause in the lecture, her voice carrying clearly through the classroom, "the communications failure had less to do with the terrain itself, and more with the atmospheric conditions common in that region during the spring months. The ridge would have affected standard radio transmission, but not to the extent described in the report. The dust content in the air from seasonal storms creates a particular kind of interference that degrades certain frequencies more severely than terrain alone would account for." The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward Naomi. Captain Rhodes stared at her with a mixture of surprise and professional curiosity. "That's not in the manual, Recruit Reeves," he noted, his tone suggesting interest rather than challenge. "That's the kind of detail typically only known by signal specialists with field experience in that specific region." Naomi seemed to realize she had revealed more knowledge than a typical recruit should possess. "From what I've read in after-action reports, sir," she added quickly, "I found the communications aspects particularly interesting during my preparation for OCS." Rhodes nodded slowly, clearly not entirely convinced by her explanation, but willing to move forward with the lesson. "An astute observation, Reeves. It's precisely that kind of environmental factor that can render textbook tactics ineffective in real-world situations." As the instructor continued, Persephone leaned slightly toward Naomi, her voice a barely audible whisper. "After-action reports? Really? Those kinds of specific environmental effects aren't included in publicly available AARs." Naomi kept her eyes forward, giving no indication she had heard the comment, though the subtle tightening of her jaw suggested awareness that her slip had been noticed. When the class concluded and the recruits filed out toward their next scheduled activity, Persephone maneuvered to walk beside Naomi in the corridor. "You've been downrange, haven't you?" she asked directly, keeping her voice low enough that others couldn't overhear. "That wasn't from reading reports." Naomi maintained her forward gaze as they walked. "We should hurry. Next formation is in 4 minutes." "I'm not trying to out you or anything," Persephone persisted. "My brother served 3 tours. The way you carry yourself, the things you know, the way you handle equipment. It's familiar." For the first time, Naomi turned to meet her gaze directly, something unspoken passing between them. Not quite confirmation, but an acknowledgement of Persephone's observation. 4 minutes, she repeated, quickening her pace toward the parade ground. The connection, tenuous but real, established something between the two women, a quiet understanding that manifested over subsequent days in small ways. Persephone stopped asking direct questions about Naomi's past, but began positioning herself as an unofficial buffer between Naomi and the continuing scrutiny from both instructors and curious recruits. When Sergeant Forrest made pointed comments about Naomi's mysterious expertise, Persephone would create a diversion by asking technical questions that redirected the conversation. For her part, Naomi remained as reserved as ever, but occasionally acknowledged Persephone's interventions with the barest hint of gratitude. A nod, a shared water bottle during a grueling ruck march, an extra portion of dessert silently placed on Persephone's tray in the mess hall. This fragile alliance extended to include Tate as well, the 3 of them forming a quiet team within the larger company structure. During team exercises, they operated with a wordless efficiency that caught the attention of evaluators. Major Blackwood noted in her reports that Reeves demonstrated natural leadership qualities that emerged not through conventional authority, but through competence that inspired others to follow her example. Colonel Hargrove, however, continued to view Naomi with increasing suspicion. The very qualities that impressed other instructors, her consistent performance, her advanced knowledge, Her unflappable composure under pressure only deepened his conviction that something was amiss with Recruit Reeves. His scrutiny intensified, manifesting in random inspections that always seemed to include her gear, additional questioning during tactical exercises, and subtle challenges designed to provoke an emotional response that never came. As the company approached the critical qualification review that would determine which candidates advanced to the next phase of training, rumors circulated about the historically high washout rate, particularly for female recruits. The tension throughout the barracks was palpable, candidates studying late into the night and conducting additional physical training during what little free time they were allowed. Through it all, Naomi maintained her steady performance, neither accelerating to stand out further, nor holding back to avoid attention. She continued the daily ritual of carefully covering the object beneath her name tag before each formation, a habit that had become so routine that even Persephone and Tate, now attuned to her unusual behaviors, had stopped questioning it. Whatever lay beneath that paper covering, whatever truth Naomi Reeves carried with her through the rigors of officer candidate school, remained her secret, for a few days longer at least. The morning of the final qualification review dawned clear and cool, a welcome respite from the oppressive heat that had characterized much of the training cycle. Candidates assembled on the parade ground in their dress uniforms rather than the standard training attire, the formal occasion marking a critical milestone in their journey toward becoming commissioned officers. Those who passed would advance to the next phase of training. Those who failed would be recycled to start over or removed from the program entirely. Tension radiated from the formation as Colonel Hargrove strode onto the field, accompanied by a distinguished-looking officer whose chest bore the single star of a brigadier general. Brigadier General Thaddeus Matheson, the candidates had been informed, had arrived specifically for this review, an unusual level of senior oversight that underscored the importance of the day's evaluation. "Stand at ease," Hargrove commanded, and the formation shifted in unison to the more relaxed position, though there was nothing relaxed about the atmosphere. "Today is not a celebration," he continued, his voice carrying across the silent parade ground. "It is simply another, evaluation, another opportunity to demonstrate whether you have what it takes to lead American soldiers in combat or whether you've been wasting our time and resources." General Matheson stood slightly behind Hargrove, his weathered face impassive as he surveyed the candidates. Unlike the colonel's intimidating presence, Matheson projected a quieter authority, the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove and no need for theatrical displays of power. "This isn't social hour at summer camp," Hargrove announced, his gaze sweeping across the assembled recruits. "This is where we separate actual officer material from participation trophy winners. General Matheson will observe as we conduct our final evaluations before determining who advances." The review began with the traditional uniform inspection, even more meticulous than usual given the formal nature of the occasion and the general's presence. Hargrove moved through the formation with deliberate slowness, examining each candidate with surgical precision, finding infractions so minor they would have been invisible to untrained eyes. A thread loose on a sleeve, a quarter-inch deviation in a ribbon placement, a smudge on an otherwise immaculate shoe. Nothing escaped his notice or his criticism. When he reached Naomi's position, his entire demeanor shifted subtly, a predator detecting familiar prey. His eyes immediately focused on the spot beneath her name tag, where the paper badge had been visible throughout the training cycle. Today, in her dress uniform, the item was still present, a small irregularity in an otherwise perfect presentation. "Still playing dress-up, Recruit Reeves?" he asked, his voice pitched low, but carrying enough for nearby candidates to hear. "I thought I made myself clear about unauthorized items." Naomi maintained her position of attention, eyes fixed forward. "Yes, sir." "After all this time, after repeated corrections, you still insist on violating uniform regulations," Hargrove continued, his voice rising to ensure more of the formation could hear. "This speaks to a fundamental character issue, a belief that rules apply to others, but not to you." From her position, Naomi could see General Matheson's attention shift toward their interaction, his expression showing the first hint of active interest rather than general observation. Something in his posture suggested recognition, though whether of her specifically or merely of the situation was impossible to determine. "Since you insist on bringing arts and crafts to my training ground," Hargrove said loudly, ensuring the entire company could now hear, Let's share your little paper badge with everyone." He reached toward the item, fingers grasping the edge with clear intent to tear it away and hold it up for mockery. As his thumb and forefinger closed on the paper covering, it tore easily away from what lay beneath, revealing what had been concealed throughout the entire training cycle. The unmistakable gleam of a genuine Silver Star medal, one of America's highest decorations for valor in combat. Hargrove froze mid-motion, his face draining of color as recognition dawned. The Silver Star was no trinket, no unauthorized decoration. It was an award that spoke of extraordinary heroism in combat operations, an honor bestowed only upon those who had distinguished themselves through exceptional courage under fire. Dead silence fell over the formation. The few candidates close enough to see what had been revealed stared in shock, their expressions transforming from nervous anticipation of another recruit's humiliation to stunned disbelief. The silence spread outward like a wave as awareness that something momentous had occurred rippled through the ranks. General Matheson stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "Is there a problem, Colonel?" Hargrove struggled visibly to recover his composure. "Sir, this recruit has an unauthorized decoration." "That appears to be a properly awarded Silver Star," Matheson interrupted, studying Naomi with new intensity. "Not something typically worn by basic recruits." All eyes were now fixed on Naomi, who for the first time broke her position of attention, meeting the general's gaze directly. "Major Naomi Reeves, Special Operations Command, serial number 86SETI-5309, sir." A collective gasp rippled through the formation. She wasn't a recruit at all, but a commissioned officer. And not just any officer, but one decorated for valor and apparently serving in one of the military's most elite commands. "I believe you received the briefing about the training evaluation program, Colonel," she continued calmly, her voice transformed from the carefully modulated tones of a recruit to the assured authority of an experienced officer. "I was assigned to assess training conditions following reports of discriminatory practices." The change in her bearing was subtle but profound, a mask removed to reveal the true identity that had been concealed beneath it. Without altering her physical posture, Naomi suddenly projected an authority that shifted the entire power dynamic of the situation. Nearby, Persephone and Tate exchanged looks of shocked comprehension, suddenly connecting all the small incongruities they had noticed throughout training: her advanced knowledge, her physical capabilities, her unusual composure under pressure. It hadn't been the stoicism of a well-prepared recruit, but the professional discipline of an experienced combat officer. "You're Kingfisher," Drill Sergeant Landry said suddenly, stepping forward from her position behind the formation, recognition finally crystallizing in her expression. "Kandahar Province, 2017. Medical evacuation under fire after the Ridge ambush." Naomi inclined her head slightly, confirming the connection without elaboration. Landry rendered a sharp, perfect salute. "It's an honor, Major. Your actions saved my entire squad that day." The revelation sent another shockwave through the assembled candidates. Not only was Reeves a commissioned officer and combat veteran, but she was apparently someone whose actions were known to others who had served, a figure of some significance rather than a random evaluator. General Matheson gestured toward the headquarters building. "I think we need to continue this conversation in private. Colonel, Major Reeves, please join me in the Commandant's office immediately." He turned to address the rest of the formation. "Drill Sergeant Landry, continue with the scheduled evaluations. We'll resume the review afterward." As Naomi fell in step with the General and Colonel Hargrove, the formation remained at attention, but the atmosphere had transformed completely. What had begun as a standard, if high-pressure, evaluation had become something entirely different, a moment of revelation that called into question everything the candidates had experienced over the past weeks. Inside the Commandant's office, the scene had shifted to one of formal military procedure rather than training hierarchy. Naomi now wore her proper Class A uniform, with full decorations visible, the Silver Star that had been partially concealed throughout training, a Purple Heart indicating wounds received in combat, and multiple commendation medals speaking to an extensive and distinguished service record. General Matheson sat behind the Commandant's desk, reviewing a detailed report that Naomi had apparently prepared throughout her time undercover in the training program. Commandant Orion Davidson, a respected colonel with 30 years of service who oversaw the entire officer candidate school, stood by the window, his expression grave as he absorbed the implications of what was unfolding. Colonel Hargrove stood at attention, his military bearing impeccable despite the profound professional embarrassment of discovering that one of his recruits had actually been a decorated major conducting an official evaluation of his training methods. "Your documentation is irrefutable, Major," Davidson acknowledged, turning from the window to address Naomi directly. "The statistical patterns alone warrant immediate program overhaul. Female candidates with identical or superior qualification scores are washing out at more than twice the rate of their male counterparts." "I recommended this approach," Naomi explained, her tone professional rather than accusatory. "Going undercover provided unfiltered observations that a formal inspection would have missed. When instructors believe they are being evaluated, behavior changes temporarily but returns to baseline afterward." "With respect," Hargrove interjected, his voice tight with controlled emotion, "my methods produce exceptional officers." "For some," Naomi interrupted calmly, "my report shows 92% completion rate for male recruits meeting baseline qualifications versus 43% for equally qualified females. That's not maintaining highs. Standards, Colonel. That's applying different standards." General Matheson set down the report and leaned back in his chair. "The quantitative data is compelling, but even more concerning are the qualitative observations. Differential feedback, inconsistent application of regulations, subtle undermining of female candidates' confidence through public criticism, while male candidates receive private correction and encouragement." Davidson turned to Hargrove, his expression a mixture of disappointment and resolve. "Did you even read Major Reeves's service record when the Pentagon informed us of this evaluation program?" Hargrove's silence was answer enough. "3 combat tours," Davidson continued, his voice hardening. "Silver Star for evacuating wounded under direct fire after being injured herself. Purple Heart. Ranger School graduate. Special Operations qualification. Major Reeves is precisely the kind of officer we should be developing here, regardless of gender." Naomi raised a hand slightly, redirecting the conversation. "This isn't about my record, sir. It's about ensuring all qualified candidates receive fair assessment. Colonel Hargrove is an excellent tactical instructor with valuable knowledge to impart. The issue is systemic bias in how that knowledge is delivered and how performance is evaluated." Her words, devoid of personal resentment despite the humiliation she had endured, seemed to catch Hargrove off guard. He had clearly expected vindictiveness rather than professional assessment. "What do you recommend?" Davidson asked, focusing on solutions rather than recriminations. "Not dismissal," Naomi replied, surprising Hargrove again. "The colonel's technical expertise is valuable, but oversight, structural changes, and mandatory bias training are essential. Dual evaluator systems for all pass-fail determinations would address most of the statistical disparities we observed." Davidson nodded thoughtfully. "Colonel, you'll work directly with Major Reeves to implement her recommendations. Consider it your last chance. General Matheson has the authority to recommend your removal, but the Major's assessment suggests salvaging your experience would better serve the program." "Yes, sir," Hargrove responded, the words clipped but professional. The following morning found the company assembled once again, this time with Naomi addressing them in her officer's uniform, the reality of her true identity now clear to all. The transformation in how the candidates perceived her was evident in their expressions, respect tinged with awe, and in some cases, embarrassment at how they had treated someone they now understood to be a decorated combat veteran. "The standards of this program are necessary and should remain high," she emphasized, pacing before the formation with natural authority that needed no theatrical reinforcement. What needed correction was inconsistent application of those standards. Being an officer means leading all types of soldiers, not just those who look like you or share your background. Zephyr raised his hand tentatively, and Naomi acknowledged him with a nod. "Why cover your silver star, ma'am?" he asked, the question that had been on everyone's mind. "You earned it. You could have shut down the colonel's behavior instantly by revealing your rank." "Because credentials and decorations aren't leadership," she answered without hesitation. "Actions are. A silver star or oak leaf cluster might command immediate respect, but that respect is hollow if not backed by demonstrated competence." Persephone spoke up next. "You could have shut down the colonel's behavior instantly by revealing your rank." And learned nothing about what regular recruits experience, Naomi countered. Sometimes leadership means observing before acting, understanding a situation fully before attempting to change it. Colonel Hargrove approached the formation, his demeanor noticeably different from previous interactions, humbled but professional. Company, Major Reeves will be overseeing training modifications effective immediately. Her combat experience and analytical insights will strengthen this program for all candidates. The public acknowledgement, clearly difficult for him, represented the beginning of genuine change. Leadership isn't about being recognized as important, Naomi told the assembled candidates. It's about ensuring important things are recognized, like talent, regardless of what package it comes in, and problems, regardless of how uncomfortable they make us. 6 months later, the transformed officer candidate school celebrated another graduation ceremony. Zephyr, Persephone, and many other recruits from Naomi's company received their officer commissions. The gender ratio noticeably more balanced than previous classes. Colonel Hargrove delivered the keynote address. His leadership style visibly evolved from the man who had once used humiliation as his primary training tool. The strongest leaders I've encountered, he told the newly commissioned officers and their families, aren't those who demand respect based on rank alone, but those who earn it through their actions. Sometimes the most powerful leadership lesson comes from someone you least expect to be your teacher. From her seat among the distinguished guests, Naomi watched with quiet satisfaction. Now, permanently stationed at Fort Benning to oversee the ongoing training reforms, she had seen genuine transformation in both the program structure and its culture. Statistical disparities had narrowed significantly, though work remained to be done. After the ceremony, as families celebrated with their newly commissioned officers, Drill Sergeant Landry, now promoted to Senior Drill Sergeant, approached Naomi. "The program's better," she acknowledged, watching the celebrations with professional pride. "Still difficult, should be, but fair. You change things just by being yourself and holding the line. Systems only change when we challenge them constructively," Naomi responded. "Force usually creates resistance, but example creates aspiration." Landry revealed that she was recommending another evaluation program at a different training base. "Sometimes the quietest soldiers have the most important things to teach us. Your approach worked because you didn't storm the gates demanding change. You showed what was possible through performance." As the sun set over the parade ground, a new group of recruits arrived at Fort Benning, nervously forming up as drill sergeants approached to begin their transformation from civilians into military leaders. Among the nervous faces stood another undercover evaluator, identifiable to Naomi but not to the cadre or other recruits, ready to ensure the reforms were maintained and extended. Naomi watched from a distance, knowing the system wasn't perfect yet, but was evolving. Her own journey had evolved as well, from combat soldier focused on immediate tactical problems to institutional changemaker addressing systemic issues. Different battlefields requiring different strategies, but the same core values guiding both: integrity, excellence, and the fundamental belief that leadership is about service rather than status. As the new recruits marched away for their first formation, Naomi reflected that the silver star she had earned in combat was meaningful, but perhaps less significant than the changes she had helped create by temporarily setting it aside. Sometimes the greatest valor wasn't found in dramatic moments under fire, but in the quiet persistence required to transform institutions from within, standing firm in the face of daily small injustices rather than single moments of danger. The true legacy of her undercover mission wouldn't be the commendations added to her file or the official reports submitted to the Pentagon. It would be the careers of officers like Persephone and Zephyr, who might otherwise have been lost to the system's biases, and the hundreds more who would follow them through a training program that now evaluated them on genuine merit rather than preconceived notions of what an officer should look like. Different battlefields, different forms of courage, but the same essential truth. Sometimes the most important victories are won not through confrontation, but through the quiet dignity of simply being who you are and standing firm in that truth, even when others fail to see it.